In today's video we are going to look at GCSE and we're going to look at Unit 2, which is the UK, and the rivers unit. So I'm going to start by going over some of the river processes with you. And I'm going to start with the processes of erosion, and I'm going to talk you through some of these processes. So the first three processes we've got here are processes of erosion. And the first one, if you remember, is abrasion. Now abrasion is like scouring or wearing away of the bottom and the sides of the river. And that's done like a Brillo pad, like you would clean a Brillo pad if it had food on it, and you give it a rub and the burnt on stuff would come off. So it's similar to the water carrying a lot of sediment, and that sediment runs along the bottom and the sides of the river and it wears it away. So that is abrasion. Our second process is attrition. And if you remember again, attrition is where bigger pieces of material, maybe towards the top of the river, that have fallen down the sides of the slopes and got into the channel. These are breaking up as they're rolling down the river, hitting against each other, hitting against the bottom and the sides, and they're breaking into smaller pieces. When they break into smaller pieces, they're able to abrade the river as well, the sides and the bottom, because the pieces are slightly smaller and the power of the water can carry them along. The third type of process is hydraulic action. And hydraulic action is where we have cracks and gaps in the side and the bottom of the river, and there's air there, and the water pushes into those gaps and it makes the gaps wider and it makes it easier for the materials in the river to abrade. So there are processes of erosion. The second processes I want to look at are processes of transportation, which is how sediment is moved down through the river from the top of the river where it's eroded down to the bottom of the river where it's deposited. So the first one is for very large pieces of material which might have fallen again from the sides of the slope into the river, and these are moved by rolling along the bottom of the river, and this is called traction. And the reason they roll is that they're very big and the river doesn't have the power to pick them up and keep them up in the river and move them that way, so they roll along the bottom of the river. What they might do is hit against each other and break into smaller pieces. So these things are linked. The second movement is saltation, which means that these smaller pieces that have hit together and become smaller are jumping. Saltation means to jump. So here the river doesn't quite have enough energy to pick them up and carry them, but it picks them up a little bit, then it drops it, so that piece of sediment moves little by little along the river, again breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. The third process of transportation is suspension, and this is where the material in the river has become small enough that the river is able to keep it floating in the water and transport it in the water. So that is suspension, and these are quite small particles. And the final process is solution, and that's where some particles have dissolved. Maybe like salt in water, if you give it a stir, the salt dissolves. So any kind of materials, maybe calcium carbonates, etc., the water's a little bit acidic, then they'll be taken into solution and that material will be taken out further down the river. So they are our processes of erosion and processes of transportation.